This episode is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your Raspberry Pi with our all-in-one arcade kit using genuine Sanwa arcade parts. And OneClickPrint.com for your photos on canvas, acrylic, gifts and more. Local craftsmen and global delivery.
This is the Commodore Amiga 600. It's a machine that I've said many times on the channel that I do not like. And it's probably about time, now that I have one here in the cave, that I reconcile my differences, that I explain to you why I hate this machine so much, and maybe we can be friends, and that should probably start with me putting the hammer down. First of all, let's talk about the context of when this machine came out. It was in 1992 that it was released by Commodore, and it was part of the Commodore Amiga range. That range started in 1985 with the Commodore Amiga 1000, which, at the time, they weren't entirely sure what to do with. And with hindsight, we recognise that it was massively ahead of the curve. It was a phenomenal machine for 1985, and one that some have now christened as the world's first truly multimedia computer. 1985's A1000 would be cost reduced and concentrated down into the A500 so that people like me could afford it in this wedge-shaped form factor. And 1992's Amiga 600 was designed to replace the A500 there. It was a low-cost entry-level machine into the Amiga range. Now, when the Amiga 500 came out in 87, it really did benefit from that huge technological leap that was found within the Amiga 1000. 2 years since the A1000's release may seem like an eon in technological terms, but actually it worked really well for the A500. It gave Commodore the chance to cost reduce that amazing package in the 1000 and, as I said, make it affordable. But now, as we skip ahead to 1992, the A500 is 5 years old, the original A1000 is 7 years old. It's starting to look a bit like an old dog, and Commodore really need to catch up with the competition in what the PCs are doing in order to be competitive again. Now yes, the A500 hadn't stood completely still. It was tweaked in the form of the A500 Plus in 1991, but only minor changes had taken place, some of which caused compatibility issues with software written for the machines, as well as other tweaks which on the whole are known as the ECS or Enhanced chipset, as opposed to the OCS or original chipset of the standard Amiga 500. And it was the original OCS-based A500 that I owned in 1992. I waited with bated breath. I bought every Amiga format magazine every month and other magazines, but this was the magazine that I was loyal to, and I was loyal to Commodore. I was just waiting for them to tell me what to buy next. And it was in issue 34 of Amiga format magazine that the next computer, the Amiga 600, was previewed. And I needed to read no further than the first paragraph for my Commodore world to come crashing down around me. It read, "The new Amiga, labelled the 600, is the logical successor to the A500 for game players. Briefly, it's like a cut-down A500 with the edge connector replaced by a slot for credit card-sized ROMs, and it features a TV modulator." The article went on to say it would retail at £399, the same retail price as the popular A500 Cartoon Classics computer and software pack here in the UK. With a bit of shopping around in the very same issue of Amiga format, you could actually find that for £324.99, or the A500 Plus machine on its own for £299.99. So on the face of it, as I understood the article, Commodore were offering nothing more to Amiga owners than an existing 5-year-old machine with the removal of an expansion port and the addition of a credit card slot. Yeah, you can sense my frustration. Now, I am being a little unfair on the A600 because there was one other extra that Commodore included, and that's an IDE interface, so that you could add hard disks to the machine internally, 2.5-inch laptop style hard disks. There was no hard disk controller in the A500. If you wanted to add a hard disk, you needed something like this. A big old wedge expansion that goes on the side of the machine using that removed edge connector, the edge connector that's been dropped from the A600. So I guess they had to put an IDE interface inside because hard disks were getting cheaper in 92. They were getting more popular, and it was pretty standard on a PC by then to have a hard disk, or at least it was becoming very standard to have one. So for about £400 you could get the Amiga 600 with a 20 megabyte hard disk. Not bad on the face of it, unless you're in my position, and that's £400 that buys you a machine that does little more than the machine you already have, and you could upgrade the machine that I already had for about £100 in the bargain bins to give it a hard disk and do everything that the A600 could. For me, that was £400 better spent on buying a PC, and that's exactly what I did. I forgot all about Commodore and I moved on to PC ownership throughout the 90s and beyond. However, here in the present day, I think it's about time that we considered what maintenance I should do on this machine to make sure it's looked after, what modern upgrades I can put in it to see if I can make it a more useful machine than it was back in the day, and if I can learn to love the Amiga 600, all the while learning more about its history along the way. So if you're prepared to join me, let's see if this machine will forever be trash to me, or if I can make it into some kind of treasure in my mind. Come on then, let's see what you got. There is no denying that the A600 is a compact package, but its petite nature comes at a cost: the amputation of the numeric keypad. For comparison, here it is mounting an A500, and you can see the space saved is significant in comparison and amounts to around the same width as a copy of F-18 Interceptor, one of my favourite flight sims, and quite ironic as it makes full use of the numeric keypad, and without it you'll struggle to play the thing. What would have been nice here is dual function keys, perhaps the numeric keypad accessed through the other keys, holding down a function key, just like we do in modern laptops, but no such luck in 92, I'm afraid. The cosmetic condition of my example isn't bad at all, and you may have noticed the badge still has its protective film over it, which I can't resist peeling off, so let's just enjoy the moment together. Oh, did you enjoy that? I know I did. Far less satisfying, however, is the bump under the spacebar, which is entirely avoidable. This is caused by a screw being used that's just too long for the case. So someone has had this open before, and we can confirm that by looking at this repair sticker from B&M Services. They have a telephone area code somewhere near Leeds in the north of England. But that's not to say they were responsible for using the wrong screw. Someone else may have had a go at this machine before conceding to the experts. We just don't know. But we do know this was opened in January of 93 by BM. Wonder if the repair database exists anywhere out there. If anyone happens to have access to that file, I know it's a very, very long shot, but if anyone happens to have that old database, let me know. Anyway, a quick glance around the machine reveals that we've got a floppy drive and DE9 ports for your joystick and mouse on the one side, and the PCMCIA slot is around on the other side there. And on the rear, we've got a full complement of ports as found on the larger Amigas, which is really quite impressive. I'm particularly impressed with the integration of the RF modulator inside the case. On the A500, this was built into an A520 TV modulator. That was a thing that stuck out the back of the machine. It made the A500 deeper than the A600 as well as being wider. And back in the early 90s, this was an essential feature, allowing us to tune our portable TVs in our bedrooms into the computer instead of requiring an expensive monitor. So I have to admit, I am impressed with the form factor of this machine and the size reduction they've achieved. For modern retro computing enthusiasts, it's not going to take up too much space on your desk, and back in 92 it would have fit comfortably on your tiny bedroom computer desk if you were lucky enough to have one. But to give you a better sense of scale of this machine, here's the classic Competition Pro joystick next to it. And here's a bottle of beer, a banana for scale, and a pipe. Between these items, you should all now know precisely the scale of the machine. Moving on. So it's time now to open up our A600 and see what's inside, but you never know if there's a treat waiting for you in the trapdoor expansion, so let's have a look in there first. And in our case, no, there's nothing in there, no extra memory, but also thankfully nothing with a leaking battery on it in there, so it's not a bad thing really. And we can make use of that expansion port when we upgrade it, as we will do later. But let's see what else we've got first. Let's pop out the screws. And when we pierce the seal on the repair sticker to take the middle screw out, it is the correct size, so the damage must have been caused to the machine at an earlier point. Or maybe the repair technician did it, realised his mistake and then swapped it out. We just don't know, but it hasn't been done since the date of this repair. Opening the machine up, we need to be careful of the connector for the status lights. we'll just pop that out there. And also the keyboard ribbon, which is generously long enough to lay the two halves side by side. And its secrets are not given up yet because of all that shielding over the machine. We just can't see anything yet. So I'll pop that connector up gently. You never quite know if these old plastics are going to be brittle and shatter, but it was fine. I just popped it up with a screwdriver gently and detached the cable. And then we can pop up the many tabs on the shielding and then try and lift it out, giving it a good wiggle. We may or may not put this back in. It depends on the upgrades we use. It's not strictly necessary. And then we can lift the system board out, but it does need a little bit of persuasion on the right hand side. I'm just bending the plastic case enough to slip out the DE9 ports. Next we loosen up the jack screws around the rear ports, and then I'm removing them by hand once loosened, and that allows the system board to be separated from the tray. That tray has a plastic liner. We don't want to lose that when we put it back together, or the whole machine will short out on the metal tray. And to finish off, the keyboard, that just snaps right out of the top half of the machine. There are no tools needed to get that out. And then the LED assembly pops out with a single screw. And that is our Amiga 600 laid out and ready for inspection. It's really not a tricky one to get into, certainly no more or less tricky than the A500 or A500 Plus. I'm sure any of you can get into this machine. It's really not a tricky one at all. So let's take an opportunity now to see the system board. So I'm pleased to see what we have here is a revision 2D board. I think that was the last of 4 publicly released revisions, and on mine it says A600, whereas the earlier boards say A300, the original name for this system, and we'll have more on that later. The code name for it was Junebug, so named after a song by the B-52s, as was tradition with the Amigas up to this point. And what can we say about it? Yes, they have clearly squashed this down nicely from the size of an A500, and as a retro enthusiast, that's not all good news. While the A600 retains all the familiar chips of the A500, we've got Gary, Paula, all of the familiar names, they are now surface mounted and not socketed. That's an understandable cost reduction by Commodore, but it does make fault finding and swapping out dead custom chips a trickier task than in the A500. Spec-wise, it has 1MB of RAM as standard. It has the same Motorola 68000 CPU as the A500, running at around 7 MHz, so there's no acceleration in this machine over the stock A500. It's all very, very familiar for Amiga owners. But what does stand out is, of course, the use of the surface-mounted chips, but also surface-mounted capacitors. There are some through-hole caps, but this, like the later A4000, 1200 and CD32, makes full use of them. And I think these capacitors are from the period of the Great Capacitor Plague in the early 90s. That is to say, they have a reputation for leaking. So I will recap this board even if there's no evidence at this stage to warrant it. It just needs to be done. There is also an unfamiliar chip here to us A500 owners, and that's this one. This is Gaia. Gaia is responsible for the new PCMCIA slot and the hard disk, if you have one. And this machine doesn't, but we will do something about that. So that is a small but significant addition to the A600, and one that I think has the possibility of swinging the vote as to whether or not I can like this machine. I think that will be key. On the whole though, the A600 presents no great surprises. It is, as expected, a cost-reduced Amiga 500 or 500 Plus. It's exactly what we found in here. Does that help me to learn to love the A600? Well, not yet, but at least we have a starting line. So hopefully we're a little bit more familiar with the A600. It's still in pieces over there on the workbench. The question is, can I set aside all of those old unresolved feelings of what this represents, the downfall of Commodore, the end of the Amiga range? Because it's in that period where everything went wrong for Commodore. because of the poor decisions they made. And I consider the A600 to be one of the poorest decisions that Commodore ever made. And I'm not the only one. I had a quick word with David Pleasance, the former MD of Commodore UK, amongst other jobs that he did in Commodore for many years. And here's what he had to say on the A600.
It isn't that I particularly dislike the A600 for what it is, rather I hate what it did to Commodore, as it was wrong in every possible way. My initial idea was to provide a purpose-built product to fill the gap that the C64 left, and to attempt to reach a price point low enough for the socio-economic population who could not afford an Amiga 500. So I asked for a cut-down, cost-reduced Amiga that we could sell for a maximum price of £249 to get the basic machine. But this product could be expanded as and when users could afford it. I specifically requested we call it the Amiga 300, so there was no misunderstanding as to where this model fitted in the lineup. I have no idea who ultimately changed the model number to A600. The first several thousand A600s that were built had A300 on the motherboard. The last straw was of course Bill Sidness, who was head of engineering at the time. He added some specs and it ended up costing more to make than the A500, so we shot ourselves in the foot. A team of professional saboteurs could not have done a better job.
And thank you, David, for your comments. It turns out I'm not the only one with these feelings. How do I put them all to one side? Turn the Amiga 600 into a modern day retro classic to unlock its potential and to enjoy it to its fullest? Well, over the last few weeks and months, I've actually been collecting a whole load of kit. Some for maintenance, some for upgrades. And I've got to point out, first of all, my goal here is not to turn this into an extreme machine. We're not putting a vampire in there. I've got Amigas with 030s and 040s. I'm so fortunate to have the collection of Amigas that I have. What I want to do with this is enjoy it in a state that's close to stock, not too expensive, and is convenient to use in the modern day. So that's what we're looking at here. Let's go through what's on the table. So the first thing I've got for the A600 is nice and simple, not really an upgrade at all, more a purchase for my own peace of mind and security. It's a brand new power supply. All the links for everything that I've got today I will put in the video description so you can find it yourselves. Here it is, it's nice and compact, it supports the 500, 600 and 1200. And once this is up and running, it'll have a little display here which tells us the status of the 5, 12 and I think negative 12 volt rails as well, so we can keep an eye on what it's doing. It'll cut out before damaging the machine if any problems are found. So it's just more for my own peace of mind than any kind of upgrade. I do have the old one, this old brick here, and I have checked it with a multimeter, and at the moment it's okay. But these things are destined to fail, so given the option I thought, let's just get a new one. This won't go in the bin, don't worry, I will service it at some point. There's every chance that this is not related to the Amiga at all and I've just picked up the wrong box from my pile. Let's see what we've got. So what we've got here is a compact flash adapter to go into the side of the Amiga 600. And then an adapter within an adapter and a 16 gig SD card. So we're going to get some storage through the side. And my idea with this is not to use this as the primary storage, but to use it as a very quick and convenient way of putting a memory card into the 600, taking it out, putting it into my PC to copy files onto and putting it back in. So this is more for transporting files back and forward rather than the primary storage device. A nice convenient option. Comes with a driver disc. What else have we got here? Oh, I've bought something else from the same place. This is a memory upgrade. A modern one. Slots into that trapdoor slot in the bottom. I've opted not for to have the real-time clock module. I've got no need for it. I don't want to be putting batteries in when I don't need them. So there's a bit of flux on there. That's a bit sticky still. There's already 1 meg of chip RAM in the machine, so this will take up to 2 meg. Chip RAM, of course, can be used by all of the chips. The other RAM you have in the Amiga is fast RAM, which is dedicated to the CPU. So, RAM and storage. Let's see what else we've got. What we've got in this next box is the Wicher 608, a huge memory expansion. We've got a couple of jumpers here that tell us we can set it to 4 or 8 meg of RAM. I think that's a 16 meg SD RAM module. There are ways, I think, of making the Amiga SC 11 meg. Regardless, if we can see 8 or we can see 11, we'll find out when we set it up. It's still a huge amount and it's more than I need. So much so, the only way to get this amount of RAM to work on a 600 is to clip it directly onto the CPU, onto the 68,000. Clunk. Hopefully it doesn't get too hot and pop off. Should be fine. So that's exactly what we want. The reason I want so much memory is because I'm going to be using a piece of software called WHD load, which we'll see later, and that has a pretty high memory overhead. It allows us to run software that wasn't necessarily designed to be hard drive installable. It allows us to run it off the hard drive, but it needs lots of RAM, so that's why I want this. Right, let's see what's next. So we saw we had the PCMCIA storage, but I want some internal storage, the hard drive effectively. But we're not using any spinning old rust on this anymore. We're going to use this. That is an SD card adapter, and that's an L-shaped adapter to go into the ID interface on the board, so it keeps it nice and flush. That sticks out the side of it like this, and then that is effectively our internal hard drive. So we've got our internal hard drive to install everything on, and that one to swap files onto it from nice and easily. We need a memory card with that. I've picked up a 16 gig one, I believe. Yes, 16 gig SanDisk. So our Amiga 600 has its power covered, it has its internal storage, it has the ability to swap files onto it, it has all the RAM we need, fast and chip RAM and drivers. And the final piece of the puzzle is maintenance. We mentioned the surface mounted capacitors and how awful they are. So my good friend Scott over at Retro Bench has sent these in. No, not these. That's for an Atari Jaguar. These ones. So we've got our recapping guide. And we've got a set of organic polymer capacitors. And the advantage of the polymer capacitors here is that they're a dry capacitor, not a wet capacitor. They don't have electrolytic fluid inside. They have an aluminium foil inside instead. So it performs exactly the same task, just without that threat of things leaking and destroying your Amiga 600. So they cost a little bit more than a normal electrolytic cap, but I think it's going to be worth it in this instance. We've got our through holes and our surface mount caps there to install. So that is the plan on how to upgrade this Amiga 600 and to enjoy it a bit more. I'd like to know in the comments what you would have added. I know there are things like the Furia, which is an accelerator that you can put in the 600 that gives you loads more features as well. It may be that I have to put one of those in, but as I say, I want to keep it relatively stock. Just tons of RAM, storage space, see how we get on with that in the first instance. But let's try and avoid that for now. Love to know your thoughts in the comments. I'm going to get all of these fitted in part 2, roll my sleeves up and get on with it now, starting with the recap. And I look forward to sharing that experience with you. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you did, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, or give it an Australian thumbs up. And I'll see you next time. Thank you. Take care.